Max Rowell, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. Number 13 of the 50 most relevant is a guy, he made it last year into the 50 without even playing a game of footy. That's how good this player is. I'm talking about Matt Rowell, the 2019 number one draft pick. Joining me on this episode, we haven't heard from him for around about a month. Right in the 40s, Caldwell and Rosie podcast episodes. You've got to go back to check them out. I'm talking about Lewy. Hello, mate. How are you?
Good day, MJ. It's been a little while now, mate, but I'm keen to get back and start talking about Matty Rowell, who for the next 10 years minimum, I think is going to be a bit of a fantasy juggernaut.
There's everything about him suggests he's going to be an absolute monster for us for a really long period of time. And despite only playing a handful of games, we saw some monster scores in shortened quarters in 2020. His best ever score was also his highest scores, oddly enough, with your first ever season. It was a 106 in AFLFantasy and DreamTeam. You want to play the adjusted averages, that's well over that 120 marker. While in SuperCoach, if you play that format of the game, check this out, 171 points. Not a bad effort in your second ever game of footy. From an average perspective, he delivered for us a 70.8 in Dream Team, while that's been adjusted up for AFL Fantasy at an 88.5. While in Supercoach, he did manage to crack the ton in his debut season with 100.8. In that format, he is going to be priced just under 500K. Just over 570,000 in AFL Fantasy and $588,400 in DT. And Louis, there was lots of talk in the preseason last year. Could Matthew Rowell emulate the incredible debut season that we got before from Sam Walsh? Walsh did something that no first-year draftee had really ever done, and that is dominate from day one. But Matt Rowell, while we only saw a small sample size of games, showed that from day one, this kid's going to dominate the fantasy footy landscape.
Oh, and didn't he just, from round one versus Port Adelaide, puts up an 80 to start his career in fantasy, which is, relatively unheard of besides the rare few. Look, he's perfect in that inside midfield brigade in the Suns. Sam Walsh is a great comparison that you make, MJ, because we saw that he was hyped up during his draft year, his junior years. All the blokes that get paid more than us to tell us what these blokes can do are saying that, hang on, Matt Rowell might just be better than Sam Walsh. So we saw him come in. He played his first year. He only played 4 games, but we saw enough to suggest that he could probably take it up to Sam Walsh. And that comparison is so great because we saw Sam Walsh back it up in his second year, and that's what we're expecting Matt Rowell to do in 2021.
It certainly is. Look, he did play 5 games across the year, if you want to really include that game that nothing really happened, but we're not going to do that for the sake of this conversation. But 18 possessions he averaged last year, 5 tackles, 4 clearances, 4 score involvements per game, 2 rebound 50s and 2 inside 50s. So we're seeing, as you look through those columns of score builds, a guy that can get the ball on the inside, no problem. A guy that can be damaging on the outside. A guy that can win the ball at the coalface. A guy that can bring defensive pressure. And then someone that works hard both ways of the ground to support his defensive unit while also becoming an attacking weapon. That average last year in Dream Team and Fantasy of 70, adjusted up to an 88. These are some of his scores non-adjusted from that year. 64, not bad start. 108, 104, and 78. Not a bad start. Let's check out how he went in Supercoach for those full games that he was able to play for us off that average of 100. 72, I know what I'll do. I'll just add another 100 on top of that for the next week with a 172, 141, and 114. He did, like you said, what Sam Walsh did in terms of dominated fantasy football and just the football landscape as a junior, translated that through to us in albeit a handful of games in 2020. And now, because of the injury, he does come with a little bit of an injury discount for us. So in 74 average, is what he's been priced at for us in AFL fantasy. That's around about 15 points unders what he delivered for us last year. Priced at a 92 in SuperCoach, so around about 8 points per game underneath what he delivered for us, and priced at a 63 in DreamTeam and fantasy. It's around about 7 points per game unders, and I think that's what people are excited by. We saw great scoring, limited quarters. Yes, he's 200,000 more than what we had to pay for him last year. But at this price, Louis, does he have to be a premium for us? Maybe it's a different conversation for every format, but does he have to pop 100 average for us to make his selection worthwhile in 2021?
No, not at all. Like you said, if he can redo his numbers in his first 4 games last year of 90, he's 15 points underpriced. And what we already saw was that ceiling, and he builds that ceiling through hitting all the stat lines, bar probably marks, which you could also argue there's scope for improvement in that area as well. So I think a player like that can accumulate their fantasy score by hitting the scoreboard. He showed that he was great when running out of the midfield and shooting at goal. He finds the football. He's an accumulator. He gets the football first touch, and he still has a nice kick-to-handball ratio because of that, which is quite rare. Often we'll see a bloke might have 12 handballs, 3 kicks, and their fantasy score suffers because of that. Matt Rowell's not like that, and his tackles are always going to bring his floor straight up. So I think what he's priced at is probably his floor, possibly one of the lowest scores we will see in 2021. I think the discussion we've got to have is what can he do above that? Because I think we all know that Matt Rowell has plenty of upside in 2021.
Yeah, he does. Look, for me, and we'll talk about the injury that he's returning from, that shoulder injury in just a moment. I think for me, where he's priced at in AFL fantasy, normally they would award the injury discount to a player's highest average of the previous 2 seasons, but because Rowell's only got 1 season, it goes straight onto that one. So for me in that format, if he's fit, firing, even if he gets managed, which has been some of the conjecture in the preseason, in AFL fantasy, he's priced at such a level where there's no risk. He's also got such high ownership that there's no risk because of so many people on him. So I think in DreamTeam and SuperCoach, a little different because he's priced at that 92 marker in SuperCoach. For me, I think in that format, he does have to hit that 100 marker, maybe even get up to the 105 to really deliver some returns. While in DreamTeam and fantasy, I think it's similar. The reason I suggest that, I suppose, Louis, is we're not shy on value picks through the middle portions in our midfield. Players that we've already talked about in the 50 most relevant, maybe some others that are still to come, include Rory Sloane, Jackson Haitley, Dyson Heppel, Ben Cunnington. All of these guys, depending on the format you play, he's priced in, around, or even more expensive than some of these other names. So it does start to get hard where we go, can I pick him at the same price point when I've got a Rory Sloane who's done multiple years of 100+ averages, as opposed to a guy that's really only shown 4 games of good scoring? That's going to be sometimes a little bit of a dilemma for coaches this preseason, isn't it?
Definitely, MJ. But I think with those players that you did mention as well, your Heppel types, Rowell has a clear, defined role.
True.
He's going to be in that midfield. He's a franchise player. The Suns are building their team around Matt Rowell. So I think in terms of, yes, he doesn't have the runs on the board. He does in juniors, but not previously at AFL level, of course, like a Rory Sloane does, who goes at 100. So you're looking at the potential upside of him instead. Whereas these other guys, yes, they've got upside. They've got improvement where they're priced at, but can they reach the heights that what a Rowell could? Like, we've seen his ceiling. So
yeah, look, for me, I think there's plenty of upside in him. That shoulder injury that he's coming off the back of, again, if you want to have some concern, the good news is he's being able to do the aerobic and the endurance side of the preseason. You don't need your shoulder to run. So the good news is he's still going to get those kilometers into the legs and build that fitness base. I suppose the concern is, Louis, how does such an in and under footballer, he's not one-dimensional, he's not, and this is not a slide, He's not a Patrick Cripps, where Cripps is all inside and not much else. Rowell's shown, albeit in a few games, he's got a little bit of both to him. I suppose that's the thing that coaches might have some hesitancy about. How does he return from that shoulder? How does he handle himself? And like you mentioned, he's a franchise player for the club. Do they choose to play the long game and go, look, if he misses every 3 or 4 weeks because we're just caring for him, that might be some level of concern for coaches.
Oh, definitely, MJ. And I think we've already seen that the Suns are going to take that route. We knew as soon as he was injured in round 5, just a few days later, the Suns were happy to say, nah, wrap him up in cotton wool. We'll get him ready for the next preseason. You know, this is a bloke we want fit and firing as much as possible. Compare that to like a Titch in round 1 who hurt his shoulder. So, you know, they're definitely taking more precautionary measures because Rowell could have played the season. You know, he would have played through pain, but would have affected him going forward. My concern with the shoulder is that I brought up Titch. You've also got Judd, Ablett, Rocky. All these blokes have hurt their shoulders at stages, you know, close to their fantasy peak. So when they've ended up coming back and they're up to a certain amount of fitness where they can take the field at AFL level, they're not putting up the same numbers. Often they're dipping and then they are returning, or it's the beginning of a steady decline in scoring.
Yeah,
so
and I think
what I
that's
want to know is whether or not Matt Rowell can push through the pain. Is there pain? But also whether or not the Suns are going to be ultra precautionary. Like you said, after round 4, they might say, yeah, he's a little bit sore, or nah, your load's been a little bit too large in the first 4 rounds. We're going to rest you for this game, and then you can play the next block of 4 and we'll assess there.
Yeah, I think that's probably, if anything, the most likely scenario is they want him for as long in his footy career as possible. And is a round or 2 really going to matter in the shape of his career? Absolutely not in their view. And so it wouldn't shock me if they manage him at points this year. On the other side, wouldn't shock me if he said, stuff ya, I'm firing, I'm fit, I'm going for it. And he absolutely brains it in 2021. He's got everything about him to suggest that the only thing is history is against him as a second-year player from delivering big numbers. We're talking Clayton Oliver. We're talking Nat Fyfe. We're talking Jackson McRae. Like, it's rare for a player in their second season. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And Rowell is a rare talent. But it is certainly, the odds are probably a little more against him just based on variables and data there, isn't it, Louis, that says most second-year players hold or regress, but Rowell ain't any normal player.
Yeah, often that happens just due to a little bit of a role change in their second year. They've got a bit more fitness, they've got a bit of a bigger body, and just the coaches wanting to expand the skill set of the player. These blokes are 18, 19 years old. They've come from juniors where they've been pretty much pigeonholed into one role. So Rowell was obviously a midfielder. He was very good at it, and he now finds himself playing in the AFL round 1 last year inside in the midfield. So that sort of speaks a testament to the role and what he can do in there. I think in his second year, we're going to see more of that. I'm not sure Rowell is going to be used on a wing like a Noah Anderson is perfect for that. They just went and got Brandon Ellis. He's not going to be used up forward because I'm not sure he's got the nous, the goal nous to sort of, you know, from stoppages, snap those freaky little Eddie Betts kicks. I think his best role is in the midfield, and I'm going to be watching him really closely in the preseason, especially his time on ground and just purely his role in the guts there on what he can deliver and whether that's a sign of what's to come in 2021.
Yeah, it's fair. Look, you know, I think he's the best player on the Gold Coast Suns list already. I thought that before he even played a game. Again, not a slide to the Suns. It's just how good he is. Has he put a target on his back? Well, round 1, they come up against the West Coast Eagles. Wonder, do they have known historically to go for a tag? Can they, or will they go and do that? Round 2 is North Melbourne. Round 3, the Adelaide Crows. Round 4 is the Carlton Football Club. Round 5, they come up against the Bulldogs. And then round 6, Sydney. So probably outside of West Coast and maybe Carlton, there's a history beyond a few games where they do like to use a tagger. Whether or not they do that, whether or not they send it to Rowell, those are things that I guess we'll have to wait and see. But certainly he's going to be a phenomenal player for us for a long period of time. And should he get through the preseason unscathed, I think if you're an AFL fantasy coach, given that ownership, given that price point, you don't need to get pretty, just lock it in. And in Dream Team and SuperCoach, if you think he's got the capacity to go right up to that 100 marker in Dream Team and fantasy in Dream Team, a little bit over that, maybe 100, 105 in SuperCoach, then I think you've got some value for money with those selections. But where he goes in a draft, Louis, this interests me in great deal.
Yes.
Is there somewhere for you think, I think if you want Rowell, you might have to reach a little to get him, is where I think, like, to definitely secure him. Where do you think he goes in a draft?
Yeah, he's a fascinating draft player because there will be people that decide to reach on Rowell and there will be people that are quite cagey. So going somewhere in between, I think, and not being a draft player myself, I'm mostly purely classic. To me, he seems like he'd be a very, very good M4 and probably, I think around the M4 range. Where do you see it, MJ?
I think if you get him on M4 on draft day, you are just letting everybody know how high quality of a human being you are and giving them that. Look, I think some leagues he might go M2 because someone's super bullish. M3, I think, is about that median place where he goes on sort of draft day. And then, mate, if he slides to M4, I want in on that draft. Absolutely. That would be the place. But there will be people that are bullish on him and they just go, he's a 105 guy this year and I love him and I want to own him. Maybe it's because they play in a keeper league or a dynasty league and they own him and they just want to have that in this new league as well. So, for me, I think M3 is the sweet spot. If you're desperate to have him, I think you have to jump early and get him at an M2. And that might be early. And I think it probably is early, but I understand why you'd go there. And then, I think you're right. M4, that is the absolute win of wins. If you can land him through there. And maybe you do. If people are really desperately wanting to lock away those forwards and defenders early and hoping, I'll just go in for mids later on in the draft and I'll just pick up the Heppels, the Swallows, the Sloans, these guys all at the back end. You actually might get him through there. So it's not as crazy as someone hearing it goes, M4, Louis, you've lost the plot. No. If people structure their draft out right, there's absolutely a world I do see that happening. So appreciate your thoughts, man. And thank you for joining us as we talked about Matt Rowell.
No, absolute pleasure, MJ. One of my favourite players already. So I love talking about Matt Rowell.
As it should be. If you want to go and read the article, it is online now for you at coachespanel.tv. Tomorrow we get to the number 12 player. If you'd like to know who that is already, our Patreons, they already know. You can join that Patreon supporter group with all the links. Also, you can find it at coachespanel.tv. And every single episode of the 50 Most Relevant, you can grab that via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your Google Podcasts. So if you're just rolling into February thinking, I should probably think about my fantasy side, I've just caught up on the 50 today, go back, man. There is hours and hours, episodes upon episodes for you to go and check out. All right, the teams are done. The top 12 is away. Who's at number 12? I'll tell you tomorrow.